So I've got my Autocross Mustangs here, affectionately called the Warhorses. They compete in the classic American muscle class, most often referred to as CAM. They're both IRS-converted cars with nearly identical suspension setups, but there is one big difference between the two. The blue car is a 3.8-liter V6. Now why on earth would anybody build an IRS-converted New Edge V6 to compete against V8s with twice the horsepower? The V6 engine weighs about 200 pounds less than the V8, and losing 2 cylinders up front means the weight is in line with the axles, not ahead of them, which makes this little V6 turn better than any New Edge Mustang I've ever been in. Now is probably a good time to tell you that I do between 20 and 30 autocrosses a year, and I'm a novice instructor for 2 local clubs. I've ridden in and driven a ton of Mustangs, and competed against heavily modified CAM cars. The V6 surprised quite a few V8s last season on its way to finishing 2nd and 3rd in championship points in my 2 clubs. Then why even have the V8? Well, the V6 does great on short and mid-length courses, but it needs just a bit more power and RPM to compete on the longer courses. But every time I switch to the V8, I'm reminded that it just doesn't turn in as fast as the V6. That big engine stretching ahead of the front axles creates a steering response delay when attacking slaloms and Chicago boxes, which costs time, and more time equals less trophies. So the V6 is nimble, but not fast enough, and the V8 is fast, but not nimble enough. The V6 already has a cold air intake, 65mm throttle body, headers, an X-pipe, dual exhaust, underdrive pulley, and 1.8 roller rockers. Getting more power out of it means ported heads and intake, and a new camshaft because I don't want to add the weight of a supercharger up front. Those mods cost thousands of dollars, and I can't do them during the season without missing races. What I need is an inexpensive way to get the GT to turn in better that I can do in between events. As you can see, the front suspension has been upgraded with adjustable struts, an 1 3/8 sway bar, aluminum sway bar mounts, and 13-inch Cobra brakes. What you don't see are coilovers. Why not? Because the car is very competitive without them. People think racing is about spending the most money. I think it's about spending the right money. A smaller budget forces you to make better informed choices, to fix things instead of replace them, and to drive around the limitations of your car. But some limitations you just can't drive around. Take a look at the sway bar and the A-arm bushings. They're polyurethane, meant to hold up better than rubber, and they've only been on the car for 1 season. But the sway bar bushings are wallowed out, and the A-arm bushings aren't sitting flush against the shells. That means deflection and/or movement under load. The bushings on the V6 don't look this bad, so the weight of the V8 being thrown around is clearly the cause. Luckily, there's a solution. I'm going to upgrade to tubular A-arms, Delrin sway bar bushings, and aluminum steering rack bushings. Together, these should vastly improve the turn-in on the GT. There haven't been a lot of good options for tubular front A-arms that allow for stock-style springs to be used. BMR introduced these A-arms recently, and they look like a solid, cost-effective option. They have high-diameter, greasable poly bushings, they weigh less than the stock stamped pieces, and should be much stronger. Maximum Motorsports offers these aluminum steering rack bushings. They should eliminate deflection and reposition the rack for better steering response. Steeda makes these Delrin bushings that work with their 1 3/8 inch front sway bar. Delrin doesn't deflect and wallow out like poly, so these should allow the sway bar to do its job better. You're hearing a lot of these parts should do this and should do that. And if you're like me, you watch a lot of these videos and you read a lot of reviews and you wonder, do these people actually use the parts how they were intended? Well, here's my promise to everyone out there building a Warhorse of their own. If I put a part on my car, it's going to get raced and reviewed under real-world autocross conditions. I'm not a professional mechanic, I don't have a lift or a shop. I work on my back, in the driveway, and sometimes in a garage. I have limited funds, but unlimited passion for building and racing these cars. Hopefully, I'll be able to show you that it's not that hard to get out there and be competitive. All in, the install took 10 hours. Make sure you have tools to separate the ball joints, a good torque wrench, and a lot of patience. If you've never done this kind of work before, you're better off having a shop do the install. You will need an alignment afterwards. BMR A-arms come with instructions in black and white. They don't, however, include the torque specs, so it's a good idea to have a shop manual on hand if you're going to tackle this job yourself. The Maximum Motorsport steering rack bushings come with instructions in black and white. They're very thorough, and you can download a color version of the instructions from their website. The Steeda sway bar bushings do not come with instructions, but they're a relatively simple install. You will, however, need to know the torque spec of the sway bar mounts. The A-arms came with aluminum spacers to correctly position the cotter pin in the castle nut. The spacers weren't tall enough, so I had to improvise. I also had to grind the K-member near the bottom of the driver's side steering rack bushing to create the proper clearance. Here's a look at the A-arms, steering rack bushings, and sway bar bushings installed on the car. The question now is, did they make a difference? I just got back from my first event with the new parts, and I can tell you the difference is night and day. The steering response is immediate, and the car is completely composed in the slaloms and sweepers. You also don't feel the speed nearly as much, which gives you the confidence to push harder. The car feels planted through fast corners and much more willing to change direction. I didn't have to use the brakes to settle the car as often because I had tremendous trust in its ability. Eliminating the weak links in the front end made the GT feel every bit as nimble as my V6, and I couldn't be happier with the results. So if you're autocrossing a Mustang and you want to tune up your turn-in, I highly recommend BMR's tubular A-arms, the aluminum steering rack bushings from Maximum Motorsports, and Steeda's Delrin front sway bar bushings.